Old woman takes in 2 freezing baby Bigfoots. The next day, a whole tribe stood at her door. Disclaimer: this is 100% fiction, a made-up story for entertainment purposes only. Picture this: dead of winter in the Montana mountains, cold as hell. Nearest neighbor is 8 miles through woods that don't give a fuck about your survival. That's where Dorothy Chambers, 68, decided to spend her golden years. Peaceful until nature throws you the curveball of a lifetime. Fictional story, real message. Comment your state or country, let's see where most viewers are from. So here's what happened. Dorothy Chambers wasn't supposed to be living alone in a cabin that Google Maps forgot existed. The woman had a whole life before this, 40 years as a pediatric nurse in Billings. A husband who died 5 years back from a heart attack that came out of nowhere. 2 grown kids living their own lives in Seattle and Phoenix. After Tom passed, after the funeral flowers wilted and the casserole dishes got returned and everybody went back to their regularly scheduled programming, Dot looked around her suburban house and thought, nah, this ain't it anymore. She sold that house within 3 months. Her kids thought she'd lost her mind. Mom, you're almost 70. You can't just move to the middle of nowhere. But Dot had spent 4 decades tending to sick children, comforting parents, working 12-hour shifts that turned into 14-hour shifts because that's what the job demanded. She'd earned the right to do whatever the hell she wanted. And what she wanted was silence. Real silence. The kind you can't buy in a city where sirens are the soundtrack and your neighbor's dog barks at 3 a.m. like it's his job. So she found this place, a cabin that had been built in the 1970 seconds by some guy who'd clearly watched too many wilderness survival shows and then abandoned it when reality hit different. Took Dot 6 months to make it livable. New roof, fixed the chimney, got a wood stove that could heat the whole place, installed solar panels that worked half the time, but hey, better than nothing. She had a satellite phone for emergencies, a radio that picked up 2 stations on good days, and enough books to keep her busy until she was 90. Living out there, 8 miles from the nearest human, wasn't lonely for Dot. It was freedom. She woke up when her body felt like waking up, not when an alarm told her to. Chopped wood when the pile got low. Read medical journals because old habits die hard, but also romance novels because why the hell not? Made soup that lasted 3 days. Watched the seasons change through her kitchen window like it was the best TV show ever created. Her routine was simple, almost meditative. Wake up around 6, get the fire going if it died overnight. Make coffee that could strip paint off walls strong enough to wake the dead, Tom used to say. Breakfast was usually oatmeal with whatever dried fruit she had stocked up. Then she'd bundle up and do her morning walk around the property, checking the perimeter, making sure no trees had fallen on the shed, keeping an eye on the wildlife trails. The animals out here didn't bother her much. Deer would come right up to the cabin sometimes, curious but cautious. She'd seen elk, a few moose that scared the shit out of her because those things are massive and mean. Black bears in the summer, keeping their distance mostly. Once she'd spotted a mountain lion on the ridge above her place, and that was the only time she genuinely felt fear, just stood there frozen, watching it, watch her, until it decided she wasn't interesting enough and disappeared into the trees. Dot knew how to handle herself. Kept a rifle she barely knew how to use, but figured the noise would scare off anything that needed scaring. Had bear spray on her belt whenever she left the cabin. Knew which berries were safe and which ones would have you meeting Jesus by dinner time. She wasn't naive about the wilderness. It could kill you in about 47 different ways if you weren't paying attention. But here's the thing about Dot. She wasn't out here hiding from the world. She was out here finding peace with it. After Tom died, after spending all those years in hospitals with fluorescent lights and the smell of antiseptic and parents crying in waiting rooms, she needed this, needed to remember that the world was bigger than sickness and death. Needed to hear wind in the trees instead of heart monitors beeping. Needed to feel cold air on her face instead of recycled hospital air conditioning. Her kids called once a week on the satellite phone. "You okay, Mom?" "Yeah, she was okay. Better than okay. You need anything?" "Nah, she was good." "When are you coming to visit?" "Maybe Christmas, maybe not." They worried, which was sweet, but they didn't get it. This wasn't about running away. This was about choosing how she wanted to spend whatever years she had left. And she wanted to spend them out here, where the only schedule was the sun, and the only expectations were the ones she set for herself. Dot had been living like this for 3 years, when everything changed. 3 years of peaceful solitude, of learning the rhythm of the mountains, of becoming part of the landscape instead of just a visitor. She'd learned to read the weather by the way the clouds moved, learned which birds meant a storm was coming, learned that the forest had its own language if you paid attention. November that year came in brutal. Not the gentle kind of winter that eases you in with a few flurries and some pretty frost. Nah, this was the kind that kicked down your door and made itself at home. Temperature dropped to 15 below zero overnight. Wind came screaming down from Canada like it was personally offended by Montana's existence. Snow started falling on November 8th and didn't stop for 3 days straight. Dot had prepared, obviously. She wasn't stupid. Had 2 cords of wood stacked and covered, enough canned goods to feed a small army, propane backup in case the wood stove couldn't keep up. She'd weathered bad winters before. This was just another one. Except it wasn't. The strange signs started about a week before everything went sideways. Dot noticed them during her morning walks. Little things that didn't quite add up. Footprints in the snow that were too big to be human but the wrong shape for bear. They were elongated, almost human-like, but massive had to be 18 inches long, maybe more. 5 toes clearly visible, heels strike deep like whatever made them was walking upright and heavy as hell. She'd heard the stories, obviously. Everybody who lives out here has heard them. Bigfoot, Sasquatch, whatever you want to call it. Campfire tales and blurry photos. And that one cousin who swears they saw something that one time. Dot had always filed it under probably bullshit, but who knows? She was a woman of science, a nurse who believed in things she could see and touch and verify. But she was also smart enough to know that being a skeptic didn't mean being closed-minded. The footprints showed up more frequently. Not every day, but enough that she started paying attention. They'd circle her property, staying just inside the tree line, never coming too close to the cabin, but close enough that whatever was making them could definitely see her. There'd be maybe 10 or 12 prints in a trail, then they'd disappear like whatever it was had just vanished into thin air. Then came the tree breaks, high up, like 12 feet up, branches as thick as her wrist just snapped clean off. Not weather damage. Dot knew what wind damage looked like. This was deliberate. Something had grabbed those branches and broken them with enough force to make a sound like a gunshot. She'd heard it one morning, that sharp crack echoing through the forest, and found the branch 20 feet away from the tree, still fresh. And the feeling of being watched. Oh man, that feeling. You know that vibe when someone's staring but you can't see them? That prickle on the back of your neck. That instinct that kept your ancestors alive when saber-toothed cats were a thing. Dot felt that almost every time she stepped outside. Like there were eyes in the forest, tracking her movements, studying her. Most people would have freaked out, would have called someone, maybe packed a bag, and headed to town until whatever it was got bored and left. But Dot wasn't most people. She was curious, intrigued even. If something was out there, something big enough to make those footprints, strong enough to snap branches that high up, it had been out there for 3 years and never bothered her. Never tried to break in, never acted aggressive, never left her feeling genuinely threatened. So she did what any former pediatric nurse with a scientific mind would do. She started leaving food out. Just small things at first. A few apples at the edge of the tree line, some beef jerky, a jar of peanut butter that she left open on a stump about 50 yards from her cabin. The food would disappear overnight, always, and not in a raccoon's got into it way. Whatever took the food was careful, methodical. The jar would be placed back on the stump, cleaned out completely, lid set neatly beside it. The apples would vanish without a trace, no cores left behind, no signs of an animal tearing into them messily. This was something intelligent, something that understood the concept of a gift, and maybe even gratitude. Dot started documenting everything. Wrote it down in a journal she kept by her bed. Dates, times, what she'd left out, what happened to it. Drew sketches of the footprints, measured them with a tape measure, took photos, even though she knew they'd look like every other Bigfoot evidence, photo blurry and unconvincing. She wasn't trying to prove anything to anybody. This was just for her own understanding. The really weird part, she wasn't scared. Should have been, maybe. A rational person living alone in the wilderness, with evidence that something large and unknown was lurking nearby, should probably feel some type of fear. But Dot felt something else. Curiosity, yeah, wonder, and maybe, if she was being honest with herself, a little bit of kinship, because whatever was out there was living the same kind of life she was. Alone in the wilderness, avoiding humans, just trying to exist in peace. She respected that, related to it, even. Then came the night of November 17th. That's when everything changed. That's when the universe looked at Dorothy Chambers and said, "Okay, let's see what you're really made of." The storm that hit that night wasn't playing around. Weather radio had been warning about it for 2 days. Blizzard conditions, whiteout visibility, wind chill that could kill you in minutes if you weren't careful. Dot had battened down the hatches, made sure she had enough wood within arm's reach, that she wouldn't have to go outside, double-checked her emergency supplies. By 8 p.m., the wind was howling like something alive and angry. Snow wasn't falling so much as being hurled sideways. Visibility was zero. Dot couldn't see her shed from the kitchen window, and that shed was only 30 feet away. Temperature had dropped to 22 below, and that was before the wind chill. This was the kind of night that killed people. The kind where search and rescue found bodies in the spring, frozen solid, huddled against trees where they'd tried to wait out the storm. Dot was inside, safe, warm, had a fire going in the stove that was keeping the cabin toasty. She'd made stew earlier, had a bowl of it with some bread she'd baked 2 days ago, was settling in with a book, figuring she'd read until she got tired, then sleep hard with the storm as white noise. Then she heard it. At first, she thought it was just the wind. Wind could make all kinds of sounds, howls and shrieks and moans that sounded almost human. But this was different. This was deliberate. A scratching at her door. Not violent, not trying to break in. More like knocking. Like something was asking for entry. Dot froze, book still open in her lap. Every cell in her body was suddenly on high alert. The scratching came again. 3 deliberate scrapes. Pause. 3 more scrapes. She got up slowly, heart pounding. Grabbed the flashlight she kept by the couch. The rifle was in the corner, but something told her this wasn't a rifle situation. This was something else. The scratching came a 3rd time, and with it, a sound. Not quite human, not quite animal. A vocalization that sounded like desperation, like pleading. Comment what you'd do in this situation. Run or stay. Be honest, no judgment. Dot walked to the door, hand on the knob, every logical part of her brain screaming, "Don't you dare open that door." But the nurse in her, the part that had spent 40 years responding to emergencies, that had run toward crisis instead of away from it, that part was louder. She opened the door. The wind hit her first, a blast of cold that felt like a slap. Snow whipped into the cabin. She raised the flashlight, hand shaking not from fear, but from the cold and adrenaline. And there, on her porch, was a Bigfoot. Not the kind you see in movies, huge and aggressive and scary. This one was big, yeah, maybe 7 feet tall, covered in dark brown fur that was matted with snow and ice. But what got Dot, what made her gasp out loud, was the desperation in its eyes. Because the creature was holding 2 babies. They were small, maybe 2 feet tall, covered in lighter brown fur that was soaking wet. They weren't moving, just hung limply in their mother's arms. Dot could tell it was a mother, could see it in the way she held them, the way her whole body language screamed panic and grief. The mother Bigfoot made that sound again, that vocalization that cut straight through the wind. Her eyes locked on Dot's, and in that moment, despite every difference between them, despite one being human and one being something that wasn't supposed to exist, Dot understood exactly what was being asked of her. Help, please. My babies are dying. Help. Time slowed down to nothing. Dot stood there in the doorway, flashlight beam cutting through the snow, looking at a creature that defied everything she thought she knew about the world. This wasn't possible. This wasn't real. This was the kind of thing that happened in stories, not to a 6-8-year-old retired nurse living in the Montana mountains. But it was real. The mother Bigfoot was real. The babies in her arms were real, and they were dying. Dot had maybe 3 seconds to make a decision that would change everything. Every cell in her body was screaming mixed messages. Run versus help, versus this is insane, versus those babies need you. She thought about Tom, about all those years in the hospital, about the Hippocratic oath she'd never technically taken, but had lived by anyway. First, do no harm, and when possible, help. Always help. Dot stepped aside and gestured into the cabin. The mother Bigfoot didn't hesitate. She ducked through the doorway, had to bend almost in half to fit, and stepped into the warmth. Dot shut the door behind her, cutting off the howling wind, and just stood there for a second, trying to process what the hell was happening. There was a Bigfoot in her cabin, a Bigfoot, holding 2 babies who were hypothermic, and maybe worse. This was real. This was actually happening. The nurse in Dot kicked in like muscle memory. She pointed to the area near the wood stove, the warmest spot in the cabin. There. Lay them down there. The mother understood. She moved with surprising grace despite her size, careful not to knock anything over, and gently laid both babies on the rug near the stove. Then she looked at Dot, and the expression on her face, yeah, they had expressions. Dot could read them clear as day, was pure helplessness. She didn't know what to do. She'd come to a human for help, because she was out of options. Dot moved fast, grabbed every blanket she had, her first aid kit, towels, a basin of warm water, not hot, warm, because you don't warm up hypothermia victims too fast, or you can send them into shock. Her hands moved on autopilot, doing what they'd done thousands of times with human babies, adapting on the fly for babies who were covered in fur and had hands that were too big and feet that were too long, but were still, fundamentally, babies who were in crisis. She knelt beside the first one, a male, she thought, and started checking vitals. Breathing was shallow, too shallow. Skin fur, whatever was cold to the touch, wet and icy. Heart rate was slow, classic hypothermia. The baby wasn't conscious, wasn't responding to stimuli. How long were they in the cold? Dot asked, knowing the mother probably couldn't answer, but asking anyway, because that's what you do in an emergency. The mother made a soft sound, almost like a whimper. She held up her hands, tried to gesture, and Dot realized, shit, they'd been out there for hours. The mother had probably been trying to keep them warm, trying to find shelter, and when that failed, had made the desperate decision to come to the one human she'd been watching for weeks. Dot wrapped the first baby in blankets, rubbing gently to stimulate circulation. Come on, little one, stay with me. She positioned him as close to the stove as was safe, then moved to the second baby, a female. Same process. Check breathing, heart rate, temperature, wrap, warm, stimulate. The mother watched every movement Dot made. She was tense, ready to intervene if Dot did anything that seemed dangerous. But she was also clearly choosing to trust, choosing to believe that this strange human who'd been leaving food out, who'd opened her door in the middle of a blizzard, might be able to do what she couldn't save her babies. They're going to be okay, Dot said, not sure if it was true, but needing to say it anyway. We caught it in time. They're going to be okay. She worked for what felt like hours, but was probably only 30 minutes. Got both babies dried off as much as possible. Their fur was incredibly thick, dense, water-resistant once it dried. Kept them warm, but not too warm. Monitored their breathing, and slowly, So slowly, they started to respond. The male baby twitched first. Just a finger movement, tiny, but Dot saw it and felt a surge of relief that almost made her cry. Then the female's breathing deepened, evened out. Then the male opened his eyes, huge dark eyes that looked startlingly human, and made a small sound. The mother Bigfoot reacted immediately, made a sound back, soft and soothing, reached out a massive hand to gently touch her son's face. The baby turned toward her voice, instinct recognizing parent even in his confused state. And that moment, right there, changed everything Dorothy Chambers thought she understood about the world. Dot sat back on her heels, watching the mother Bigfoot comfort her babies, and felt something break open in her chest. This wasn't some monster from campfire stories. This was a mother who'd risked everything, including exposure to a human, which had to go against every instinct to save her children. This was family. This was love in its purest form. "Okay," Dot said, voice steadier now that the immediate crisis was passing. "Okay, we need to keep them warm and get some fluids in them." Gently, slowly, she stood up, joints protesting because kneeling on the floor at 68 wasn't what it used to be, and moved to her kitchen. The mother Bigfoot watched her every move, protective but not aggressive. Dot could feel those eyes tracking her as she heated up some of the stew broth, diluted it with water, let it cool to lukewarm, grabbed a clean medicine dropper from her first aid kit. When she came back, both babies were more alert. The male was trying to sit up. The female was making small sounds. The mother had positioned herself between them and the rest of the cabin, creating a barrier with her body. Smart. Even in crisis, even while trusting Dot enough to be here, she wasn't taking chances. "I need to give them fluids," Dot said slowly, holding up the dropper so the mother could see it. "Just broth. It'll help warm them from the inside, give them some energy. I won't hurt them, I promise." The mother stared at the dropper for a long moment. Then, incredibly, she nodded. Just a small dip of her head, but it was unmistakable. She understood, and she was giving permission. Dot knelt again. Her knees were going to hate her tomorrow, and approached the male baby first. He watched her with those huge dark eyes, curious but wary. "Hey there, little man," she said softly, using the voice she'd perfected over 40 years of pediatric nursing. "I'm going to help you feel better, okay? This might taste weird, but I need you to swallow it for me." She carefully placed the dropper at the corner of his mouth and squeezed gently a few drops of broth. The baby's eyes went wide, and for a second, Dot thought he might spit it out. But then he swallowed, and his expression changed to something like surprise. He made a small sound, almost questioning. "Good boy," Dot murmured. "That's good. A little more now." She gave him the rest of the dropper slowly, letting him adjust to each amount before giving more. Then she moved to the female baby and repeated the process. This one was more hesitant, turning away at first, but when her mother made a low rumbling sound, encouragement, reassurance, the baby accepted the broth. The whole time, the mother Bigfoot watched. Dot could feel the weight of that gaze, the assessment happening behind those intelligent eyes. She was being tested. This mother was deciding whether to trust her completely, or whether this was still a situation that might require a fast exit. Dot didn't blame her one bit. If their positions were reversed, if Dot had been desperate enough to seek help from something she'd been taught to fear her whole life, she'd be just as cautious. "They need to rest now," Dot said when both babies had taken as much broth as they could handle. "Sleep is important for recovery. The warmth, the fluids, and rest, that's what's going to get them through this." She grabbed a few more blankets and arranged them into a makeshift nest near the stove. The mother understood immediately. She carefully picked up both babies, so gentle despite her size and strength, and settled them into the blanket nest. Then she positioned herself right next to them, one massive hand resting protectively over both children. Dot stood there for a moment, just watching. The scene was surreal. There was a family of Bigfoots in her cabin. Bigfoots, cryptids, creatures that weren't supposed to exist, that science said were impossible, were currently sleeping next to her wood stove. She should probably be freaking out. Should probably be questioning her sanity. Should probably be doing anything other than feeling this strange sense of calm, of rightness. But here's the thing, Dot had spent her entire adult life in medicine, had seen thousands of parents with sick children, had witnessed every kind of family dynamic imaginable. And what she was seeing right now, despite the species difference, despite the impossibility of it all, was exactly the same. A mother protecting her babies. A family in crisis. Love that transcended everything else. The mother Bigfoot looked up at Dot, and their eyes met. And Dot saw gratitude there, clear as day. This creature, this being that could probably tear her apart without much effort, was looking at her with pure gratitude. "You're welcome," Dot said quietly. The night stretched on. The storm outside continued to rage, wind howling like it was angry at the world. But inside the cabin, things were calm, peaceful, even. The babies slept, their breathing evening out, bodies warming up. The mother dozed lightly, never fully asleep, always alert. Dot made tea and sat in her armchair. The one Tom had always said was too old and saggy to keep, but that she'd loved anyway. She watched the Bigfoot family by her stove and tried to process everything that had happened in the last few hours. Her whole worldview had just been turned upside down. Bigfoot was real. Not just real, but intelligent, capable of reasoning and communication and love. Everything she'd thought she knew about what was possible had just been rewritten, and honestly, she was okay with that. More than okay, because this was proof that the world was bigger and stranger and more wonderful than most people imagined. There were still mysteries out there, still things that science hadn't explained or documented, still magic, if you wanted to call it that. Around 2 a.m., the male baby woke up. He looked around, confused, probably wondering why he wasn't, wherever home was. Saw his mother and immediately calmed. Then he noticed Dot sitting across the room. They stared at each other, human and young Bigfoot, across the space of the cabin. The baby tilted his head, curious. Dot smiled and gave a little wave. The baby blinked. Then, very slowly, he raised one tiny hand and waved back. Dot's heart just about exploded. "Well, hello there," she said softly. "Feeling better?" He made a small sound, almost chirping, and snuggled closer to his mother. But he kept watching Dot, fascination winning out over fear. His movement woke the female baby, who also looked around with wide eyes. She was more cautious, staying very close to her mother, but she watched Dot with the same intense curiosity. The mother made a low sound, and both babies looked up at her. She touched each of their heads with one gentle hand, checking them over the way any mother would. Satisfied that they were okay, she looked at Dot and made a different sound, lower, longer, almost musical. "You're welcome," Dot said again, because that's what it sounded like. "Thank you. Anytime." She got up slowly, not wanting to startle anyone, and went to the kitchen. Made more broth, this time with some vegetable bits in it. Brought it over with a larger bowl and a spoon, offered it to the mother. The mother Bigfoot looked at the bowl, then at Dot, reached out one massive hand and took it carefully, like she was afraid of breaking it, brought it to her face and sniffed. Then, using her fingers because the spoon was way too small for her hands, she scooped out some vegetables and ate them. The babies watched and immediately started making sounds that any parent would recognize as "I want some too." The mother gave them small pieces, careful to make sure it wasn't too hot, and they ate eagerly. Dot went back to her chair and watched this whole scene unfold. A Bigfoot mother feeding her babies vegetable soup at 2 a.m. while a blizzard raged outside. If someone had told her a week ago this would be her life, she would have recommended they see a psychiatrist. But here she was, and she wouldn't trade it for anything. As dawn started to break, not that you could tell much with the storm still going strong, the babies were clearly feeling much better. They were moving around more, making more sounds, even playing a little bit with each other, wrestling gently the way young siblings do, making their mother rumble with what Dot swore was laughter. Drop a 1 if you believe Bigfoot is real, 2 if you think it's just legend. I'm curious. The storm finally started to ease up around 9 a.m. The wind died down to something less apocalyptic, and the snow went from blizzard to just heavy snowfall. Dot looked out the window and saw nothing but what had to be 3 feet of new snow at least, maybe more. The mother Bigfoot stood up, careful not to disturb her babies who were playing. She walked to the window and looked out, same as Dot had. Then she turned and looked at the door, and Dot understood. "You need to go," Dot said. "Your family is probably worried." The mother looked at her, and again Dot saw understanding in those eyes. She made a soft sound, then went back to her babies, gathered them up, one under each arm. They protested at first, not wanting to leave the warm cabin and the new friend, but their mother was insistent. She carried them to the door and waited while Dot opened it. The cold air rushed in again, but it wasn't as brutal as last night. The storm was passing. The mother paused at the threshold, looked back at Dot, and then she did something that made Dot's eyes water. She placed one massive hand over her chest, right where a human heart would be, and bowed her head. "Thank you. I will never forget this. You saved my children. Go on," Dot said, voice thick. "Get those babies home. And hey, you're welcome here anytime. You know that now, right?" The mother made another sound, softer, and then stepped out into the snow. Dot watched as she trudged through the deep powder, carrying her babies, heading toward the tree line. Just before she reached it, she turned back one more time, raised a hand, waved. Dot waved back, tears streaming down her face now because this was just too much. Too beautiful, too impossible. And then they were gone. Disappeared into the forest like they'd never been there at all. Dot closed the door and leaned against it. Looked at her cabin, the wet spots on the floor where snow had melted, the blanket nest by the stove, the bowl that had held soup now empty on her table. Physical evidence that it had been real, that it had actually happened. She made coffee and sat in her chair and tried to figure out what the hell she was supposed to do with this experience. Who could she tell? Nobody. They'd think she'd lost her mind. Her kids would probably try to have her committed. And honestly, she didn't want to tell anyone. This felt sacred, somehow, private, a secret between her and a family who'd trusted her when they had no reason to. The rest of the day passed quietly. Dot went about her normal routine, or tried to, but everything felt different now. The world had expanded. Her understanding of what was possible had completely changed. That night, she went to bed wondering if it had been a one-time thing, a unique circumstance brought on by the storm and desperation. Probably, she'd never see them again. She was wrong. The next morning, Dot woke up to silence. The storm had passed completely. She got up, made coffee, and went to the window to look at the snow situation, and froze. There were Bigfoots everywhere, not just the mother and her babies. Dozens of them, had to be 30 at least, maybe more. They were standing in a semicircle around her cabin, just at the edge of the tree line. Adults, juveniles, even a few more babies. All different sizes, all with slightly different colored fur, dark brown, black, some with reddish tints, one that was almost gray. They were just standing there, watching her cabin, waiting. Dot's hand shook as she set down her coffee. This was she didn't even have words for what this was. She saw the mother from last night in the front of the group, her 2 babies tucked close to her sides. They were moving around now, clearly healthy, clearly recovered. When the mother saw Dot in the window, she stepped forward, and with her came an older Bigfoot, one with fur that was heavily streaked with gray, moving with the deliberate care of someone who'd seen a lot of years. An elder, Dot realized. This was an elder of whatever tribe or family group this was. "Oh my God," Dot whispered. "Oh my God." Her hands were shaking as she put on her coat and boots. This was insane. This was absolutely insane. There was a tribe of Bigfoots outside her cabin, a whole tribe, and they were there because of what she'd done last night. She grabbed her medical bag on instinct, didn't know if she'd need it, but better to have it, and opened her door. The cold morning air hit her, crisp and clean after the storm. The sun was just starting to come up, painting the snow gold and pink, and standing in that beautiful light were dozens of beings that weren't supposed to exist. The mother stepped forward, babies at her sides. They saw Dot and made happy sounds, trying to pull away from their mother to run to her. The mother held them back gently but looked at Dot with something like pride. "See, my babies are well, because of you." Then the elder stepped forward. He, Dot, thought it was a he, though she wasn't entirely sure was massive. Had to be 8 feet tall, shoulders broad enough to block out the sunday. His face was weathered, wise, with scars that spoke of a long life lived. He looked at Dot with eyes that seemed to see straight through her, assessing, measuring. Dot stood her ground, wasn't sure what else to do. This felt important, like a moment that mattered in ways she couldn't fully understand yet. The elder made a sound, deep and resonant, that seemed to vibrate in Dot's chest. Then he raised both hands to chest level and brought them together, fingertips touching, and bowed his head. Every Bigfoot behind him did the same. All of them. 30+ creatures, bowing in unison, showing respect and gratitude in a gesture that transcended species. Dot felt tears streaming down her face again. "I just did what anyone would do," she said, voice breaking. "They're babies. Of course I helped." But even as she said it, she knew it wasn't true. Most people wouldn't have opened that door. Most people would have been too scared, too skeptical, too conditioned to believe that something unknown was something dangerous. Dot had chosen differently, had chosen compassion over fear, had chosen to help instead of hide. And this moment right here, with an entire tribe thanking her, was the result. The elder straightened up and took another step forward. From somewhere, Dot couldn't see where, maybe a pouch or bag of some kind, he pulled out something and held it out to her. But what Dorothy Chambers received in that moment wasn't just a gift, it was an honor that would bind her to this tribe forever. The elder held out his massive hand, and in his palm was something carved from wood. Dot stepped forward carefully, snow crunching under her boots, and took it. It was a small figure, maybe 6 inches tall, carved with incredible detail. It depicted a human woman, she realized, with 2 small Bigfoot babies in her arms. The craftsmanship was extraordinary, every line deliberate, every curve meaningful. "This is beautiful," Dot whispered, turning it over in her hands. "Did you make this?" The elder made a sound that might have been affirmation. He gestured to the carving, then to the mother and her babies, then to Dot. His meaning was clear. "This is you. This is what you did. This is how we will remember." Dot clutched the carving to her chest, overwhelmed. She'd saved 2 babies because it was the right thing to do, because her nursing instincts had kicked in and she couldn't have done anything else. She hadn't expected gratitude, hadn't expected acknowledgement, and she sure as hell hadn't expected this. A tribe of Bigfoots showing up at dawn to honor her. The mother came forward next, her babies bouncing excitedly at her sides. She was carrying something too, and when she got close enough, Dot saw it was a bundle of plants, herbs, roots, things Dot didn't recognize. The mother placed them carefully in Dot's hands, then touched her own chest and made a gesture toward the forest. "Medicine?" Dot asked. "These are medicinal plants." The mother nodded. They definitely understood way more than they could speak, and made another gesture. Dot interpreted. "These grow in our territory. They heal. We want you to have them." "Thank you," Dot said, meaning it with everything she had. "Thank you so much." One by one, other members of the tribe came forward, each bringing something. A juvenile Bigfoot brought smooth river stones, polished by water and time. An adult female brought what looked like woven grass, formed into a small basket, so intricate it must have taken hours. Another brought pine cones, arranged in a pattern that was almost artistic. A young male brought a bird's nest, carefully preserved, that he placed gently at Dot's feet. They were giving her everything they had, everything that mattered in their world. Gifts from the forest, created with care, offered with respect. Dot accepted each one, thanking each individual Bigfoot, making eye contact, showing that she understood the significance. Her arms were full now, piled with treasures that wouldn't mean much to most humans, but meant everything to her. The two babies she'd saved couldn't contain themselves anymore. They broke away from their mother and came bounding through the snow toward Dot, making happy chirping sounds. They were moving well, fully recovered, full of energy the way healthy babies should be. Dot laughed and knelt down to hell with her knees. This was worth it, and let them come to her. They were so gentle, touching her face with small hands, making sounds that were probably the equivalent of thank you, thank you, thank you. The male baby hugged her neck, his fur soft and warm. The female baby patted her hair, fascinated by how different it was from their fur. Their mother watched with an expression that Dot would swear was fond amusement, like she was thinking, yeah, they like you. Welcome to being adopted by Bigfoot babies. After a moment, the mother made a sound, and the babies reluctantly pulled away. They ran back to her, looking over their shoulders at Dot the whole time. The mother gave Dot a look that clearly said, they're going to be talking about you for years. The elder made another sound, this one different. The whole tribe responded, straightening up, becoming more alert. He gestured toward the forest, then back at Dot. We must go now, but we will not forget. I won't forget either, Dot said, and she meant it. You're always welcome here, always. If you ever need help again, you know where I am. The elder placed his hand over his heart, just like the mother had done the night before. The gesture of respect, of connection. Then he turned and started walking toward the trees. The tribe followed. Dot watched as they moved, graceful despite their size, disappearing into the forest in small groups. The mother and her babies were among the last to go. The babies waved enthusiastically, both hands in the air, bouncing with excitement. Their mother waved too, more dignified but no less sincere. And then they were gone. The forest swallowed them up like they'd never been there, like it had all been a dream. Except, Dot's arms were full of gifts. And there were massive footprints everywhere in the snow, 100 of them, physical proof that she hadn't imagined any of this. She stood there for a long time, just breathing, trying to process. The sun was fully up now, the sky that brilliant blue you only get after a major storm. The world looked cleaner somehow, brighter, more alive. Dot finally went back inside, carefully carrying all the gifts. She arranged them on her table, then on her shelves, giving each one a place of honor. The carved figure she put on her mantle, right in the center where she'd see it every day. It was extraordinary, this little wooden representation of the most important thing she'd ever done. She made breakfast, but barely tasted it. Her mind was spinning. She kept going to the window, looking out at the footprints, making sure they were still there. They were real, undeniable. The next few days passed in a weird haze. Dot went through her normal routines, but everything felt different. The forest felt different, like she was aware now of the other presence in it, the other consciousness. She wasn't alone out here, had never been alone. There was a whole community living parallel to her, in the same space but different, and now she knew about them. She left food out every night, not just scraps, but good food, venison from her freezer, fresh vegetables, honey, nuts, whatever she had that she thought they might like. And every morning, it was gone. Sometimes there'd be something left, in return more stones, more herbs, once a beautiful piece of bark with what looked like a drawing scratched into it. They were communicating, forming a relationship. Human and Bigfoot, building trust slowly, carefully. About 2 weeks after the night of the storm, Dot woke up to fresh footprints leading right up to her door, and on her porch was a deer haunch, cleaned and prepared, obviously meant as food. They were providing for her now, taking care of her the way she'd taken care of them. Dot brought the meat inside, overwhelmed again. This was family behavior. This was the kind of thing you did for people you cared about. They'd adopted her, she realized. This whole tribe had decided she was one of them now. Winter continued, brutal and beautiful. Dot saw the tribe occasionally, usually from a distance. They'd wave if they spotted her. She'd wave back. The babies, her babies. She'd started thinking of them as grew quickly. By January, they were noticeably bigger, more coordinated, more confident. One morning in late January, Dot woke up feeling off. Nothing major, just a weird tightness in her chest, a little shortness of breath. She ignored it, made coffee, went about her day. By afternoon, the tightness was worse. By evening, she was having trouble breathing. Shit, this wasn't good. She knew what this was. She'd been a nurse long enough to recognize the signs. Something was wrong with her heart. Maybe angina, maybe worse. And she was 8 miles from help, in the middle of winter, with a satellite phone that sometimes worked and sometimes didn't. She tried the phone, no signal. The storm that had blown through the day before must have knocked something out. She tried the radio, static. Dot sat down in her chair, trying to stay calm. Panic would make it worse. She just needed to breathe slowly, stay still, wait for it to pass. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe it was just anxiety or indigestion, or the pain hit like a hammer, radiating from her chest, down her left arm, up into her jaw. Classic heart attack symptoms. Textbook. She was having a heart attack. Okay, she said out loud, because talking helped, even if she was alone. Okay, Dorothy, you know what this is. You know what to do. She managed to get to her medical kit, fumbling with shaking hands. Found the aspirin, chewed it. That would help, maybe. Slow things down, give her more time. But time for what? She was alone. No phone, no radio, no way to get help. The nearest neighbor was 8 miles through snow that was still waist-deep in places. Even if she could walk, and she definitely couldn't, she'd never make it. This was it. This was how it ended. Alone in a cabin in Montana, dying of the same thing that killed Tom. There was a certain poetry to that, she supposed. At least she'd die somewhere beautiful. The pain was getting worse. She made it back to her chair and collapsed into it. Focused on breathing. Each breath harder than the last. She thought about Tom, about her kids, about 40 years of nursing and 3 years in this cabin, and that one impossible night when she'd opened her door to the impossible. At least she'd done that. At least she'd had that experience. At least she'd learned that the world was bigger and stranger and more wonderful than she'd ever imagined. Not a bad note to go out on, really. The pain peaked, and Dot closed her eyes. Well, Tom, she whispered. Looks like I'm coming to join you after all. And then she heard it. A sound that penetrated through the pain and the fear. A sound she'd learned to recognize over the past 2 months. The Bigfoots were calling, not one voice, multiple, a chorus of them, rising and falling in a pattern that sounded almost like a song or an alarm. They were close, right outside, and they were making enough noise to wake the dead. Dot tried to move, couldn't. The pain was too much. She was fading, vision getting dark around the edges. The door burst open, didn't break, just opened with force. And suddenly her cabin was full of Bigfoots. The mother from that first night was there, and the elder, and at least 6 others. They moved with purpose, surrounding her chair. The elder knelt beside her. How did he know to kneel? How did he know that's what you do for someone in medical crisis? And placed one massive hand on her chest, right over her heart. His hand was warm, impossibly warm, and the pressure was somehow exactly right. Not too much, not too little, just right. The mother was at her other side, making soft sounds, concerned sounds. One of the other Bigfoots was doing something Dot couldn't see, moving around behind her chair. Haven't subscribed yet? You're missing out. 3 new stories every week. Subscribe now. The elder closed his eyes and made a sound, low and resonant. The other Bigfoots joined in, creating a vibration that Dot could feel in her bones. It should have been scary. She was surrounded by cryptids while having a heart attack, but it wasn't. It was comforting. It felt like safety. The warmth from the elder's hand intensified, spread through her chest, down her arm, up her neck. The pain started to ease, just a little, just enough that she could breathe a little deeper. They stayed like that, for what might have been minutes, or might have been hours. Dot lost track of time. The Bigfoot surrounding her, that resonant sound continuing, the elder's hand on her heart, and slowly, impossibly, the pain receded. Her breathing eased. The tightness in her chest loosened. The darkness at the edges of her vision pulled back. She was still weak, still in danger, but the immediate crisis was passing. The elder opened his eyes and looked at her, made a different sound, questioning. Better, better, Dot managed to whisper. Thank you. How did you know? The mother touched Dot's face gently, carefully, made a gesture toward the forest, toward her chest, back to Dot. We felt it. We knew you needed help. We came. They'd saved her life. The same way she'd saved their babies. They'd saved her. The debt, if there'd ever been one, was paid. But this felt like more than debt. This felt like family taking care of family. Over the next hour, the Bigfoots tended to her with surprising medical knowledge. They brought water, helped her drink, brought some of the herbs they'd given her before, gestured that she should chew them. She did, and they were bitter, but almost immediately made her feel more stable. They kept that warm pressure on her chest, rotating who was doing it, like they were taking turns sharing their energy or body heat, or whatever the hell it was they were doing. One of the younger Bigfoots left, and came back with Dot's satellite phone. Somehow, and Dot would never figure out how they'd gotten it to work. There was a signal, weak, but there. The elder held it out to her. Call for help. You need human medicine too. Dot took the phone with shaking hands and dialed 911, explained the situation as best she could. Heart attack, remote location, stable for now, but needed evacuation. The dispatcher said it would take time, that weather was still making things difficult, but they'd send help as soon as possible. 4 hours, Dot told the Bigfoots, after she hung up. Maybe longer. They settled in to wait with her. Made it clear they weren't leaving until human help arrived. The mother's baby's now bigger, more independent, but still her babies curled up at Dot's feet, like furry guardian angels. The elder kept one hand on her shoulder, maintaining that steady warmth. Dot dozed off at some point, exhausted from the crisis, feeling safer than she had any right to feel. When she woke, it was to the sound of helicopter rotors in the distance. The Bigfoots heard it too. They stood, started moving toward the door. The elder looked back at Dot, made that gesture over his heart one more time. We must go before they see us, but you will be all right. You are strong. Thank you, Dot said, tears in her eyes again. Thank you for saving my life. The mother brought her babies over one last time. They touched Dot's face, her hands making soft sounds. The female baby pulled something from the fur on her chest. Bigfoots, apparently, had pockets in their fur, who knew and placed it in Dot's hand. A small stone, smooth and warm, to remember us, to know we care. And then they were gone, disappearing into the forest, seconds before the rescue helicopter came into view. The EMTs found Dot alone in her cabin, stable but weak, with evidence of a cardiac event that should have killed her. They were amazed she'd survived, kept asking how she'd managed, what she'd done. Dot didn't tell them about the Bigfoots, just said she'd taken aspirin and some herbal medicine, that she'd stayed calm, that she'd gotten lucky. They airlifted her to Billings, where she spent 3 days in the hospital getting thoroughly checked out. Moderate heart attack, they said. She'd need medication, lifestyle changes, monitoring, but she'd live. She'd be fine. Her kids flew in, freaking out, wanting her to move closer to them. Mom, you can't live out there alone anymore. This proves it. What if we hadn't gotten to you in time? But Dot wasn't alone. That was the thing they didn't understand. She had family in those mountains. Family that would hear if she was in trouble. Family that would come running. She went back to her cabin after a week. The forest felt like home in a way nothing else ever had. She'd lived her whole life in human society, following human rules, doing what humans expected of her, and it had been fine. But this connection to something wild and impossible and pure, this was where she was meant to be. The Bigfoots welcomed her back. She saw them more frequently now, like they were checking on her, making sure she was okay. The babies had grown even more in the week she'd been gone, and they greeted her like a grandmother returning from a trip. Dot lived in that cabin for 12 more years. The Bigfoot tribe became part of her daily life. She learned their patterns, their language as much as a human could. She became the unofficial mediator between their world and the human one, protecting their territory, keeping their secret, ensuring they remained safe and hidden. She taught the younger Bigfoots some human things, how to avoid trail cameras, which plants humans cultivated versus which were wild, how to recognize the sound of approaching vehicles. They taught her forest things, which herbs cured, what ailments, how to read weather patterns in ways meteorologists couldn't, how to move through the woods without leaving a trace. It was a good life. Better than good. It was extraordinary. When Dorothy Chambers finally died at 80, peacefully in her sleep, the Bigfoot tribe held a ceremony. They gathered around her cabin, dozens of them, 3 generations. They sang sang in harmonies that would have made human musicians weep. They left gifts on her porch, carved figures and woven grass and smooth stones. They mourned her the way they'd mourned their own. And then they melted back into the forest, carrying with them the story of the human woman who'd opened her door in a blizzard and changed everything. The story would be passed down through generations of Bigfoots, becoming legend, becoming truth. The human who chose compassion over fear. The human who proved that love transcends species. The human who became family. Closing message. Listen, this story is fiction, completely made up, but the message, that's real as hell. We live in a world where fear is the default setting, where different equals dangerous in too many people's minds, where the easiest thing is to close the door, lock it tight, and pretend the knocking isn't happening. Dorothy could have done that, should have done that, by most people's logic, but she didn't. She saw beings in crisis and chose to help, chose to look past the impossible, past the scary, past every single reason she had to be afraid, and she chose compassion. And that compassion came back to her when she needed it most. Not because good deeds always get repaid, they don't, and that's not why we do them, but because building bridges instead of walls creates a different kind of world. A world where help flows both ways, where family isn't defined by species or similarity, but by shared understanding and mutual respect. You might never meet a Bigfoot, probably won't, but you'll meet people who are different from you, people who need help, people who challenge your assumptions. And in those moments, you've got a choice. You can close the door, or you can be like Dot. The world needs more Dots, people who choose connection over isolation, who choose bravery over safety, who understand that the most powerful thing any of us can do is reach out a hand to someone who needs it, regardless of whether they look like us, or think like us, or come from the same world we do. So yeah, this was a story about an old woman and some Bigfoots. But really, it was about the kind of person you want to be when nobody's watching. When the easy choice is to walk away. When helping might cost you something, be the person who opens the door. Be the person who says, I see you, I hear you, I'm here to help. Be Dorothy. The world's a better place when we are. End of story. Disclaimer. This is 100% fiction. A made-up story for entertainment purposes only.